Well, welcome everyone. I'm Professor David Loertscher from the School of Information at San Jose State University. And it is my distinct honor today to interview Joseph Jeffery from British Columbia, Canada. So, Joseph, introduce yourself to our audience and describe your district role at the district level in British Columbia and in Learning Commons.
Hadi, Joseph Jeffery Spusi, Klitli Tine Habe Keo Watson Delti, Mitselia Habe Yun Suawati, Suetsen Inkez Suonawalie. Hello, my name is Joseph Jeffery. I respectfully acknowledge I'm coming to you today from the traditional unceded lands of the Klitli Tine. I'm happy to be able to work and play on those lands. I use the word KO in there. KO roughly corresponds to the English word for territory or land, but it encompasses a greater idea, that of the land stewardship. It could be more correctly said to mean the land that we walk on and take responsibility for. So with that in mind, I'm coming to you today from Prince George, British Columbia, or Clately KO. And I am the District Learning Commons Teacher Librarian for School District 57, Prince George. My role is to create resources, provide mentorship, peer leadership, work on privacy, copyright, work with staff on e-resources, physical resources, all sorts of different things. And also, the smaller part is we also run the library information system, deal with centralized cataloging, and have a vast array of physical resources that we send out to teachers. But those are the smaller parts of what we do.
Well, that's great. So describe to us, since you're at the district level, kind of go down into what is the what's happening in Learning Commons and teacher librarians at the school level.
Sure. So I'm going to start with a bit of a history lesson here for British Columbia. So in 2001, our government of the day illegally stripped our contract. One of the things that was removed as part of that was our negotiated ratios for specialist positions, including our teacher librarians. And with declining budgets over time, lots of districts were forced to make cuts. And we were lucky in Prince George that our district leadership saw value in teacher librarianships, and a big movement of teacher librarianships pushed hard, and we stayed with teacher librarianships, teacher librarians in our schools. But many districts around us lost teacher librarians. Then in 2010, facing even more budget cuts, they were looking to cut the district resource center. Our district teacher librarian of the day, Carrie Ewan Lowe, learned about this model called a Learning Commons and convinced our superintendent, Brian Pepper, to implement this rather than follow other districts' leads and close the district resource center. Then working with Carol Koshland and yourself, David Loertscher, and Carrie's successor, Monica Berra, they began the steps towards transformation here. 2 years later, Monica officially took over a newly formed district learning commons, and we began a district-wide vision to move our libraries towards the learning commons model. We did professional reading of the work of Loertscher, Koshland, and Zwan as a group, and began trying to understand what we would be doing and how. At first, it was voluntary, but every time a new library position came up, that was seen as an opportunity, if it wasn't already transformed, to try and push towards a library learning commons. When I was hired, I was a regular classroom teacher, and I was hired as the first library learning commons teacher librarian as my official job title from the point of hiring. And all of this history lesson is because I want you to understand the fact that because we didn't lose librarians along with much of the rest of the province, we were able to move quicker. We did lose other things. We lost counseling. Like, it wasn't like we had extra money to work with. We lost counseling positions, and that's a whole nother story. So when our contract was restored by the Supreme Court of Canada in 2015, we already had an established teacher librarian group. We had established learning commons. We started mentoring teacher librarians from other districts who had lost those over those 14 years. So many of our surrounding districts did not have teacher librarians during that time, and they came over to us to try and learn how to do this and how to become library learning commons as well. And we continue to have teacher librarians in every single school, even if they're small or partitioned with lots of other things. We have a big push towards getting people trained and doing professional development, not because because it's mandatory, but because we think it helps you understand how to move forward and work within the frameworks. So we really push leading learning, the Canadian standards for library learning commons within our district. And we have really centered our participatory learning on the provincial applied design skills and technology curriculum. So we actually started this long before the ADST curriculum came in. That's the applied design skills and technology one. And we were using the UTech model. We were really focusing on maker education, doing maker fairs, doing things to do with building in the library. And then when the ADST curriculum came in, we had already been doing this for so long, it was a natural fit for us to continue taking over this part of the curriculum and using it as a jumping off point for libraries, for collaboration of all kinds, whether it was doing some projects involving robotics and coding, whether it was doing cooking in the library, whether it was food literacy or woodworking or something, even as small as taking those red tumbler cups and like using them to build forts and other things and see structures. That really was a huge part of what we've been doing over the last decade or so. And so there's still gaps. There's still some libraries that are more library than library learning commons, but we're moving forward and we're trying to implement as best as we can with the resources we've got a really good learning commons system.
I understand that one of your roles is high quality information resources for the use across the district. Tell us about that.
So yeah, when we moved from a district resource center to a learning commons, we actually began bundling our resources up from just all of these disparate single resources into kits, where there was a combined set of resources that could go out to teachers and everything you needed was in there. And that was done long before me. That was done under my predecessor, Monica Berra. And then when I inherited the district learning commons from her, my role was to continue building those high quality resources. And so we work very closely with the different departments, inclusive education, Indigenous education and curriculum and innovation, to build those resources that we think are important, but also all the schools and even individual teachers know that they can just come to us with an idea and we can try and build it for them. And we've done that with a couple of these that I'm actually going to talk to you about. So the first kit example is one that I don't actually have any data on use because it's brand new as of this week. It's just launched, and that is our tracks and tracking kit. So this one was working with our outdoor education teachers from the Indigenous Education Department who take kids out on something called the trap line, where they learn about trapping animals and foraging and hunting skills and other things around that. So we took the information they had, lessons they had built, and created a kit with books that helped do some classroom explanation, some 3D printed examples of tracks and scat that you would find around our local forest and trap lines, built some resources that would go over things in English, French, and Decaf that went in there, and looked at how we could put together something that would allow more people to go out without having to book the trap line itself, because there's only one trap line. It's expensive to get a class out there and all of that. But if we can get kids going out into other forests out there and looking at these things, that will work as well. And we're going to be working next on an abridged version that only deals with what you can find inside city limits, because that's very different to what you can find once you go out into the wilderness around us, which there's quite a lot of. We're in northern BC. Our nearest other towns are 2.5 hours north of us, 3 hours to the east of us, 45 minutes to the west, and an hour and something to the south. So that's sort of the range of things. But we're the biggest town in northern BC. So even though we're in central BC, they call us northern BC. So we designed this kit as well to work with our backpack kit, which includes 30 student backpacks, rules of land use that were given to us by the Clately elders, a cheat sheet of local flora in English, French, and Decaf, and a clipboard, and a high quality, high grade waterproof backpack for the teacher that can go under, is rated to go underwater and keep everything dry. So you can take your student medication, you can take your student lists and all of those kind of things, emergency contact details, and be okay. There's also a tool kit in there for harvesting plants made by my colleague, Kathy Drew, our senior library technician, who in her spare time loves to quilt and do all sorts of other sewing activities. And so she built us some lovely homemade bags for those kits. And we've got 4 of those kits that allow students to go out on the land without having to worry about, do you have a backpack to bring your lunch and stuff like that. Plus, with our meals programs in schools, lots of the kids already get bagged lunch. So then they can put their bagged lunch in there and then go, and it's all integrated. I also want to highlight 2 other kit series. The first is our Pride Flag Library. So this came out of work that our Social Justice Committee on the district level was doing. And all the schools already have a standard Pride flag for Pride Month in June, which is when it is in Canada. And we wanted to create a library of flags that could be used as part of a rotating display. Each flag kit contains the flag itself, a quick history page, and allows a display to be put together really quickly. So you can centralize this in a display, get your books. We let them choose what books they want to highlight with it, and then you don't need to spend money on all 9 flags that we've got. Because each flag is about $100, because it is a full-size proper flag that can be hung on a flagpole, and is fire resistant and all of those kind of things that needs to be. So these are quite expensive for a school to have. So they go around as part of it, and they can go out to all the different schools and they can rotate through it. We have our Decaf Ways of Knowing and Enduring Understandings kit. So the elementary school that's actually right beside us, Peden Hill Elementary, really wanted to build some kits based on the 7 grandfather teachings. The thing about the 7 grandfather teachings is they're Cree, and that's a long way from us in terms of geography. And and a big push in BC, led by the amazing educator Joe Kroner, is if not here, then where? If you don't look first to your local Indigenous communities, who else is going to look to them? So rather than focusing on the 7 grandfather teachings, we looked at the Daketh ways of knowing and enduring understandings. These the local pieces that have been taught here for so long: community, respect, truth and honesty, self-identity, and responsibility. And so they, along with the 3 teaching models: outdoor learning, experiential learning, and protocol, are the 3 ways that things were taught. And then you were taught within your family, within the community, by the elders, and across the 4 seasons. Now, those don't correspond to any particular parts. There's no like, this is only taught in this part, but all of them are taught together and they all form a holistic model of learning. And so we put together these kits that allowed students to see these values in action. So they contained a variety of books and games and other things that teachers could use to strengthen students' understanding of these values. And we built 3 kits for each one of those ways of knowing: the K2 level, the 3-5 level, and the 6-7 level. The high schools do something different, so we didn't build something out for the high schools as well, because they have their own things going on. But that was some of our most popular kits that I built over the last few years. The last thing I want to talk about is not actually a kit. It's a series of books. And in the 2023 school year, so last year, working closely with both the Indigenous Education Department and an elder in the Clately community, we worked with one of our inner city schools, Harwin Elementary, to build picture books in the local Clately dialect of the Daketh language. So Clately Daketh has seen an enormous impact from residential schools, from the banning of the Batlatch, and many other Canadian policies over the years designed to assimilate and destroy Indigenous culture. And as we work to implement the new Daketh Gunuk, which is the Daketh language curriculum that was recently adopted by the BC government as a valid language curriculum that will give you credits to go into university and post-secondary education and graduation, it was important we started developing resources. We are down to only a handful of fluent speakers in the language now. And while the wider Daketh language, because it is quite a large language group under the Dene language, Dene, formerly known as Athabaskan, might be more familiar to you in United States, but Daketh is a wider language group, of which Clately dialect is just one of many dialects. And so the students designed their books, they wrote them, they illustrated them, and it was designed to be read by students in the K2 level. However, the students who are writing them, this was actually at their writing level. A lot of them, that sort of early literacy was sort of their writing level, as even though they were grade 6-7 students. And so this was both writing practice for them that they didn't see as sort of truncated writing practice, because it had a purpose. And they were really happy to write the books. They got their own copy. We presented copies of the collection of books to each of the trustees, so that our school board had copies for themselves, and then they are in our library, our district library, as a resource that you can get out in class sets of 30 of each book, or you can get a language curriculum set that contains all of the books plus a whole bunch of other ones as well in other dialects. So
what an impressive accomplishment, heavens.
it took a long time of translating because
oh yeah.
Clately dialect is not the easy, or any form of Tekheth is not the easiest to translate, because there's not really pronouns, and the way in which everything falls is very different to even English or French. It's much more task oriented as a language than English is. So there's a lot of phrasing that ends up very similar, because you just don't have words that mean that, or that are much more like German, where you have multi-stage words just slammed together to make one word.
Oh yeah. Well, and I understand that you also, as a teacher librarian, had a major push into science education. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's worth noting my background is actually in computer science and math, and I also love chemistry and physics, and I did those at university as well. Only my first year chemistry and physics, but that still helped me with a good understanding of what how to work with students on science. So my first role as a Learning Commons teacher librarian was at a public Montessori elementary school, and I worked closely with our classroom teachers to help students with their science fair projects and building quality science projects. So we had a well-stocked science supply closet filled with real science equipment. Part of Montessori education is that you give a child a child-sized hammer rather than a plastic one, and teach them how to use it properly, rather than pretend to hammer a nail in. You give them a real nail and a real hammer and actually teach them how you hammer in correctly. So we do this with science as well. We don't pretend to do science experiments. We really do science experiments. And so we work with real glassware, real chemicals, although the chemicals are designed to be ones that are very low risk for those students to use and stuff like that. But they are real experiments that they might do. And we're teaching them all of the safety aspects, all of the scientific method aspects, and doing all of that. So we really pushed that, and being one of the only people at the school who had that science background, I was in a lot of classes working with them to do this. I also was a judge for the regional science fair, though never judging my own students, because that was a passion of mine as well. Then when I moved up to high school, I really wanted to continue working with our science educators. And so there was a lot of research-based activities going on already. Lots of research into different pieces involved in the curriculum, science educators or scientists over the years. But I really wanted to make sure that we also had participatory activities for the library, that it wasn't just research-based. And so I worked with our physics teacher first to build on experiments that we could enhance. So he would do this one experiment or one demo with the fire department, where they would put him on the top of one of their ladders, extend it out, and he would drop various objects, and students would time it and try and figure out the height he was at based on those timings. It's a really cool demo, but you can't let the students go up that ladder. He's had to have special training and stuff like that to do it as a volunteer with the fire department. He's got all of those connections. So what we did instead was we worked with Lego, and we had students build something that could release an object using a motor that was controlled by Bluetooth. So they would have to build something that could hold a ball and release the ball when the motor was activated. And we would hoist this contraption of theirs up to the top of the gym. We built a pulley system to get it up there. And then they would have to release the bouncy ball, and their lab partner would have to time the fall. If you know anything about physics, you'll know this as this requires a lot of precision, because small errors compound into big ones during calculation, because the ball is accelerating at 9.8 meters per second. So every second you're off, you get really big different results. So if you accidentally aren't paying enough attention and you get an extra 2 seconds, you can end up with a gym height of like 120 meters. And then it's like trying to get the students to think, is this a reasonable amount? So there's elements of design in there, along with a physics experiment. We did provide a template that if students were really stuck, they could go into the shared drive and grab the Lego instruction template out, so they could build it if they were really like, this is not my forte. Because every year you would have some students who are like, I've never played with Lego before. I've never played with building blocks. I don't know how to do this. So we provided a way, but mostly we wanted them to actually solve a problem rather than just follow lab directions. This was about figuring out something. Another one I did with that same physics teacher was we put students in the role of insurance investigators trying to determine fault in a multi-vehicle crash. So we had a variety of information that needed piecing together. We took shots from the traffic cameras outside the school, the layout of the intersection, made up logs for like the traffic lights of when they changed and the timings, and had recorded bystander testimony and a whole bunch of other things that they then had to actually figure out what information amongst all of this vast amount of information was actually relevant, and then figure out, okay, now that I know what's relevant, actually applying it to physics equations. And so because they needed to do this, it made a very different style of assessment of skill, because it was about finding information in real world situations. Because when you're actually doing a job involving these things, you're not just going to be handed all of the calculations in a nice, easy sentence where it's really obvious how fast the train is moving and in relation to something else. You're going to have to actually figure out how to extract the information from the world around you. So we were really pushing them to find information in amongst a large data set that was relevant, with a lot of irrelevant information that they had to actually throw out and go, well, this isn't actually helpful to me. I've been provided way too much information here. So that was a really fun one that we would do every year. We also had the high school Montessori class came in and did a lot of science experiments with us. The biology department, we would store their fungal growths that they were doing. So they would do these growths involving bacteria, and they would put it around the school in different places. So we would provide them with like growth points that they could use in amongst our plants and in our back room and different places, so that they could get a variety of data. We really tried to push the library learning commons as the center of the school, and we want everyone to come in regardless. We want the PE department to come in. We want the shops department to come in with the PE department. Their PE teachers developed these lessons around concussion that we worked to house that and provide them these really expensive concussion goggles that would allow students to simulate what the vision problems of a concussion look like. And I've learned that firsthand after last year, where I actually managed to give myself a major concussion for 3 months. And so I can say whether or not those are accurate, and unfortunately they are very accurate. And I never want to put one on again, but we would do all of that kind of stuff. So try and get all of these disparate departments in, not just our humanities one, because the humanities is easy.
Inquiry in real science, inquiry in real social studies, inquiry in real fine arts, or, you know, it's,
exactly.
That's great. So, you know, we think, what if, what's your advice to administrators who are interested in kind of pursuing the whole learning commons idea with a professional at the helm of that commons?
So I'm going to quote my predecessor and mentor, Monica Berra, for a second and say, a gym pass without commitment is a waste of money. And that's sort of my philosophy in this, is you have to take the time and understand what a learning commons is and is not. I mentioned earlier that we had a period of 14 years when there were a lot of cuts, and the Supreme Court restored that. And during that time, we had some districts adjacent to us who chose to implement a learning commons, but that was done as all the books were removed from the library. We'll put some comfy seats in there. We'll put a coffee machine in there and call it a learning commons. And that's not a learning commons. That's the most superficial sort of look at visual thing, but it's not really understanding what a learning commons is. So you need to have vision and an understanding of where you want to go. You have to have professional learning that needs to be undertaken, not just by your teacher librarians, but by all levels of staff, to actually understand. Your superintendent needs to, if this is something you want to do, needs to understand what a learning commons is. They don't need to come to every professional development, but they need to be a part of the beginning so they understand where it's going and can monitor the journey. They really need to be there at the beginning and the end. The middle, other people can do, but if you don't understand that beginning and end, you're going to be lost. And so you also need to take things at a reasonable pace. You need to bring people on as they feel confident, and you need to give them adequate support to collaborate and learn from peers as they're building it out. It's also important, in my opinion, to have someone who has training or extensive experience as a teacher librarian leading the implementation. It can't just be some random administrator who hasn't really got a clue what the libraries are doing, because like any educational change, you need there to be trust and cachet with those you're leading. System change is one of the hardest tasks to accomplish in any field. And especially in education, you are constantly pushing against this inertia that is trying to pull things back into the shape it used to be. And once you've done the system change, it feels like the system always had that form. But during the transition, it needs to have a steady hand on the tiller and a large amount of our most valuable resource, which is time. Time for teachers to understand the change, time for vision, time for iteration, time for development, and time for communicating the changes succinctly to all stakeholders. Time may well be money, but it's money well spent to ensure the transition is done correctly. Measure twice, cut once. That was how I was taught how to do DIY projects. It's better to do your prep work than rush in and need to course correct, because that's expensive. And once the work has begun and the first of your teacher librarians who volunteered for this have found success, then you need to find ways to let them take on some peer leadership and mentorship to help the next wave through. We found enormous success with this, and we actually used this model after it showed us so much success through the implementation of our Learning Commons model to implement our revised curriculum. So BC undertook this huge task to revise the entire curriculum from K to 12 all at once in it launched in 2016, but the work began in 2012, and we became a pilot district in 2014. And so from 2014 to 2016 and beyond, as we were doing this, we used the same model that we had used for Library Learning Commons to such great success to help us get through this really huge systems change where almost everything about our curriculum changed and everyone needed to adapt and find new resources.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely great advice. So you just had a great experience in, over time in developing all this. What's your own bottom line about your insights into this profession and where it's going, etc.?
So for me, my bottom line of what I do and the most important thing to me is the piece of responsibility. And working in a Montessori environment, one of Maria Montessori's key phrases was freedom through responsibility. You show me you're responsible, you get more freedom to move away from me to do the tasks you need to do. You show me less responsibility, you become what she referred to as the shadow, where you would pinch onto the skirt and have to follow her around the room as the sort of 2 to 5 year old children who she was working with at the time. And so I would talk to my students about this idea of freedom through responsibility, and really emphasize its importance, that it's not just the student involved in this. This is my responsibility to you as a teacher. This is what I will do. I am going to teach you these things. I'm going to help you with these parts. Your responsibility back to me and to your peers to provide a safe environment, to provide a calm environment, not a quiet environment, but one that people can work in without too much distraction, and where you have respect for each other. You may not agree on everything, but you're not going to scream and yell or those kind of things. And respect the responsibility for yourself, what you need to do as a student for yourself, because at the end of the day, the education is yours. Like, what you learn and how you learn is you. It's not really up to me. I can't make you learn. All I can do is provide you the opportunities to do so. And so why am I talking about all of this in terms of the wider education system? Well, I feel this all applies beyond just the interactions with students. I used this model when I was in every time I'm in a mentorship position, including when I had teacher candidates. So in BC recently, we are allowed to have up to a quarter of our practicum experience in a non-enrolling environment as of 2018, I think it is. So I was able to have 2 teacher candidates who had a little bit of library time with me. So they were able to learn how to be a teacher librarian and experience a library environment. And so during that time, I would use that same thing with it. This is what I will do for you. This is what you're going to do for me. This is what you're going to do for yourself. You're going to hand your things in on time. I need to know your lessons this far in advance, and so on. And I find that transparency, that accountability is really important for me personally, to keep me on where I'm needing to go, but also for helping everyone I'm working with understand what the expectations are, because then there's less guesswork involved in it. And I was not a great student for most of my school life. I loved to learn, but not necessarily do the work I was supposed to do when I was supposed to do it. I had an hour-long bus ride to school, and most of my assignments were written on the bus on the way to school, and it showed. And at home, I was way more interested in playing video games, reading, building with Lego, daydreaming, doing anything else that was not what I was supposed to be doing. It was really in university I learned how to be accountable to me. in one of my very first classes, one of my favorite computer science professors, Dr. Casperson, told us, like, this is how university is different. There isn't a safety net, and really talked about that idea of being responsible to ourselves and accountable to ourselves. And I look at it as, individually, I'm accountable to myself, I'm accountable to the system, but also the system needs to be accountable to itself as well. And the system needs to have ways in which we can look at it and go, okay, where are we responsible for making changes, and how do we manage to stay on top of the changes we need to make? It isn't enough to just sort of let that inertia carry us all the time. Like, we need to be looking at the research, looking at where we can push and make changes that are positive and transformational. Because without those, we know the education system is flawed for a lot of people. It does not, it is not a one-size-fits-all model. There needs to be ways in which we are looking at how we can fix what is broken within it. And while it would be great to do a massive overhaul of the system, that is so big it's out of most of our control. Like, that system level change is often way too big for any individual person. But then we can look at and work as the individual teacher, the teacher librarian, the district, on those changes and how we can better do them and bring about the changes we can safely accomplish within the roles we've got.
Well, congratulations. You are just a world-class teacher librarian who's made a difference and continues to do so. I just want to pay respects to you and your whole attitude and what the difference that you've been making. And so we appreciate so much today your ideas and your philosophy, and we'll say thank you, thank you, thank you, and we'll wave goodbye, but not farewell. Okay. Thank you so much.
Snachalia mba hodelion, which means I thank you for the learning and the teaching that you've done, because teaching and learning are the same thing, that we learn and teach at the same time. So that's thank you with deep gratitude for that teaching and learning.
Okay.